right, our next speaker is Awab, and he's going to be talking about the ticket library that he's working on this summer.
So as Corey said, this seems redundant. My name is Awab. Just a little background about myself. I'm currently a student at UNC studying biomedical engineering and computer science. My main background before iRODS was a lot of mostly coursework in my computer science degree. And at that, most of it basic level data structures in Java and only one class in C, truthfully. But recently, my major experiences were working on projects with my friends related to biomedical engineering. Currently, we're working on it'll be in production for a while, but we're working on electrothesis. But on the screen here, other than my picture, that's actually one of the projects we were trying to work on last year with a couple of my friends. It was an ASL translator, but mainly my interests are in BME, but this internship has definitely changed that ever since trying to develop for a major company. So obviously I've talked about how this summer I got to work with iRODS, and my main project this summer was my ticket administration library. So the main motivation behind the library was initially introduced to me by Corey when we were discussing what libraries could be possible for the iRODS system. One of the issues that he pointed me to was to make a higher level C++ API for tickets. Main reason is the previous version, which there will be a demo showing the previous and the new version, was very clunky, easy to have errors on, and difficult to catch those errors, especially when you want to know the specific errors. It uses the previous way of handling errors, or I shouldn't say previous, but another way of handling errors, which was just to throw out the statuses, which this is a subjective opinion. It's a little harder. It's a lot harder to manage errors that way because you have to know exactly what errors can be caught by it. And as you develop, you might have an error caused by this. You never know what error exactly it is. Maybe it's something you had the string slightly off. Or an example I'm thinking about right now while developing this is I wrote write byte instead of write bytes in my code. And for the life of me, I spent like 2 hours revising my code trying to find the error. And it was as simple as just adding an S at the end of it that changed everything and made everything easier to use. So obviously, the project itself was made and written in C++. It used the previous C ticket library and some of the other iRODS features. Some of them are more modern. I'm thinking right now, one of them I used was only for testing because in the future I may use it if I further develop on this, which I hope I will. On my own, is using jQuery, which can later be used for other stuff involving tickets, but I didn't include it in my current revision currently. But it has a similar functionality to iTickets. I would say check out the iTickets documentation. That might not be the best way to say it, but a lot of the features in iTickets are replicated in this ticket API. And essentially, it's an abstraction of the previous ticket C API. A lot of it is basically that. The main thing was it makes it a lot easier to use it. The example I throw up on the screen here. This is just to create an easy re-ticket. My main concern also in the old ticket API, you'd have to define all of these strings in order for it to work in this ticket admin input. But and you could easily change one small thing and it'll ruin the whole thing. If I accidentally forget create and put different ones, you can have multiple commands here. You can put mod. You can have, I believe, mod. There's other strings as well you can use here. But the order is not very clear either. So R1 is very, how to say, archaic, very old. It doesn't make sense. It's not obvious to the developer what it's supposed to do. And in the end, the only way to catch the error in this is you have an integer at the very end that calls the function, calling the function, storing the status or the error code into that integer, and then figuring out from there what the error code is. You can always refer to the iRODS documentation, but that in itself also, if you don't know the exact error, if you run across a different error each time, there are a lot of errors that can happen, and having to code around each error is very difficult. The current ticket API that I've been working on, and I hopefully will continue to work on, is on the right. It just, the bulkiest part, in my opinion, is that first namespace, but you can make an alias out of it, which I learned through this internship, and I had to use a lot. But through it, you can just create a ticket API, specify. It's able to lock down exact components that you need to have defined before you can actually make the ticket API ticket. So for like create ticket, the Oxygen is a beautiful thing, and through it, it tells you exactly what kind of things you need. And it tells you you have to define the ticket type. You have to, then afterwards it tells you to define the collection or the data object. And then of course, if you want to have a name for it or not. If you didn't, it'll return its string to you so that you can use it for later development in case you have to add permissions, or you have to set constraints to it. Add permissions to give it to certain users or certain groups, or restrict it. Through this internship, one of the greatest things that I learned was there's so many ways to implement solutions. Through this simple, I say simple, maybe I think after revising, it's a relatively simple API. It doesn't do much as I hoped it would, but there's so many ways to tackle one solution. I think I went through 2 or 3 revisions, solely major revisions, I should say, just trying to develop this. From initially, I had everything verbatim. And then after revising it with Corey and the team, I realized there's better ways to do it. Went with that way. That also, there's a better way to do that, so I had to do it again. Second of all, obviously, C++ was one of the main things I learned. I didn't have much exposure to C++ through this internship. I learned, and this project, I learned so many things: templates, aliases, enumerations, especially since I'm used to Java. Enumerations, there's different types in C++, surprisingly. So there's an enumeration class, or just enum, and structs, which are basically, I may not define it, but simplified objects that can hold information. They can have functions, but that's a different story. Third thing I learned, the importance of Git and GitHub. Oh, I'm remembering 2 or 3 times, once at the beginning of the internship, after I finished, I should say in the middle of it, after I finished my first major push to the pull request, draft pull request, I realized after that, then I started making tests, which should not be the way most people develop, but I made test cases after that first pull request. And I realized that my test cases were not running at all. I forgot to make a commit history, and I forgot to make commits often while developing this. So I had to basically go back, start from scratch, rewrite everything to find out where my error was, just by having to go through SCD, cout to find, that may not be the right way, but to find exactly where my error was. Second time, luckily it was a good story this time, but a second time, again, I was running my test cases and I realized I made progress and made a major revision of my code. My revision did not work. So luckily this time I had the commit history, so I was able to go back to, I was able to check past, keep going back until I found a commit that worked. And then from there, try to re-implement my solution to reflect whatever I had as my major revision at the end. Another thing I learned was how to work on a major team. One of the things, especially at the beginning, I realized that oftentimes the problems I'm facing while developing, especially on a larger repository or larger project, at least 2 or 3 people have at least had it on the team, no matter what. Because especially as a new person on the team, you realize that small errors that you may have already happened. There are solutions around it. You don't have to go through the code from previous code to find exactly where that problem is occurring. You can just ask one of the team members rather than having to go around that. Also, there's the collaboration aspect, especially on such a large repository, is invaluable. If you don't work with your team, you kind of are subjecting yourself to your own thoughts. I'm trying to remember, I believe June said that one of the things was you have to communicate fast, fail hard, and communicate often. That is so invaluable in a team, especially because even though you may have you'll have an issue, you will take maybe 2 or 3 hours to fix it. Talk to someone else on the team and you'll know the problem immediately. Another thing I learned, making test cases, especially in Catch 2, new to me, but obviously it's very important on all projects to know how to test. Last thing was management of projects. Initially, I was I'll explain in a bit, but I learned about how I can take these projects on rather than having to say, I'm making a ticket API. Make small little goals for yourself so that you don't get overwhelmed by it, which was my main issue at the beginning. As I developed for the iRODS, it became very clear how I can manage myself to make the best output for the team, not just to stop. Okay, I guess I explained this earlier, but initially I was it was very daunting to join the team. I haven't done any major work with a large group before, but for like a large repository or a large project. So when I came in, there's so much information thrown at me. Luckily, the team was so helpful when it came to it. I learned so much about iRODS. A lot of stuff that I may not need for later projects or for my own interests, but a lot of it's very helpful, and it made me more familiar with this system and Obviously, based off of my last slide, I did learn a lot, especially I would like to thank Corey, especially through the last month. He's been mentoring me throughout the whole thing. He pretty much a lot of the PRs that I came and during my draft PR, a lot of the comments were given by him, and through him and discussing with him, I learned a lot of C++, learned new ways to take advantage of the new versions of C++ rather than have to use archaic technology, especially char, star, and pointers. I'd rather use references over anything from now on. And overall, I did enjoy my experience, especially at the end. Once everything is coming to a conclusion, I realized how fun it was to actually work on this project and how much I can take away from this experience and use it in my own curriculum, my own school life, as well as career in the future. Okay, thank you so much. And if anyone has any questions, go ahead.
Any questions?
Do you get a chance to use templates in this much? I'm just curious.
Templates I use a lot. Later on when I was developing, we talked about, I discussed this with Corey and Alan, I believe, but using structs. I use a bunch of structs to limit the user. If it is, it works correctly. If it's not, it'll throw an exception to the user.
All right. If there's no more questions. Thanks, Awab.
It's